first time Thomas heard about Black Hollow Road, it was from a police blotter. Single vehicle collision, 1 fatality. The 6th such note that month. He was a freelance journalist, used to writing about small-town accidents and petty crimes. But this stretch of road caught his attention. Nearly 80 deaths in a single year, all on the same 2-mile segment. The sheriff's office called it a tragic coincidence. Thomas called it a story. So, on a damp Thursday night, Thomas drove up into the Appalachians with a notebook on the passenger seat and his phone on record. His plan was simple. Drive the road once, see what all the fuss was about, get a feel for the place. Maybe there'd be a story in it. Black Hollow Road wasn't marked on the highway by anything more than a faded green sign, half swallowed by ivy. The turnoff was easy to miss. He slowed, tires crunching on wet gravel as the asphalt narrowed into a single lane between dark, looming trees. The first thing he noticed were the crosses. So many crosses, he lost count. White wooden ones, official state memorial markers with reflective strips, and handmade shrines with plastic flowers and sun-bleached teddy bears. Some were fresh, some so weathered the writing had faded away. A chill ran up his arms despite the heater. He clicked his recorder on. Dozens of roadside memorials, no traffic, visibility about 50 yards. This place feels like a graveyard. The road wound like a ribbon, hugging the slope of the mountain. There were no streetlights, only his headlights carving 2 pale tunnels through the night. The forest pressed in, the branches so close they scraped against his side mirrors on tight turns. Then, a sound. Not from the woods, from under the hood. A metallic cough. "Don't you dare," he muttered, tapping the gas. The engine sputtered once, twice, then died. The dashboard went dark. The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas coasted to a stop at the shoulder, heart pounding. The air smelled of wet leaves and hot metal. He tried the ignition once, twice. Nothing. And then he saw it. A light. A single beam swinging slowly, coming up the road toward him. Not a car. A flashlight. Thomas's first instinct was to lock the doors, but something about the slow, even rhythm of that light kept him still. A man emerged from the dark, tall, wiry, with a rain-slicked jacket and a battered toolbox in one hand. His face was calm, almost polite, like he'd been expecting him. "Engine trouble?" the man asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Yeah," Thomas said, rolling the window halfway. "Just died on me." The man crouched without another word, set the box down, and disappeared under the hood. Thomas sat frozen, watching his shadows shift across the wet road. Minutes passed. The man straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag, and tapped the roof of the car twice. "Try it now." Thomas turned the key. The engine roared back to life like nothing had happened. The man smiled faintly. "Good to go." Thomas hesitated. "You need a ride?" The man nodded once. "Yeah, just up the road." Thomas unlocked the door. The man opened the passenger side, slid in, and shut it gently behind him. And for the first time since turning onto Black Hollow Road, Thomas felt truly uneasy. The cab smelled faintly of wet pine and engine heat. Thomas kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the shifter, ready to react. The stranger sat still, almost too still, watching the road ahead with an unreadable expression. They drove in silence for the first few bends. The only sound was the tires hissing over damp asphalt and the low hum of the engine. "Not many people drive this road at night," the man said suddenly. Thomas glanced at him. "Yeah, I heard. You a local?" No. Reporter. The man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Looking for a story? Thomas nodded, gripping the wheel a little tighter. Seems like there's plenty to write about out here. Plenty, the man echoed. He turned his head just enough for the dashboard light to catch his face. His eyes were pale, washed out, like river stones. I've seen most of the wrecks myself. Thomas swallowed. You live nearby? No. The man's gaze returned to the road. But I'm always here when it happens. Thomas tried to laugh it off. That's a hell of a coincidence. The man didn't laugh. Last week it was a red pickup. Young guy, maybe 20. His brakes failed coming down that hill. He pointed ahead. Left a black streak all the way into that guardrail. You could still see it. Sure enough, when Thomas's headlights swept over the curve, there it was. A dark scar across the asphalt, ending in a twisted section of rail. You know a lot about these crashes, Thomas said carefully. I know what the sheriff doesn't write in his reports. Thomas felt the hairs on his arms stand up. Like what? The man looked at him for the first time, really looked. They all said the same thing before they died. Thomas's throat tightened. And what was that? The man leaned back, eyes on the windshield. That someone was sitting right where I am. Thomas's hands clenched on the wheel. The road narrowed into another curve, and mist had begun to gather on the edges of the asphalt, rising from the ground in thin, pale ribbons. You're saying they saw you? I'm saying, the man replied softly. They didn't have to. Thomas shivered. He couldn't remember hearing the passenger door open when the man got in. Couldn't remember the sound of his boots on the gravel. The mist thickened, swallowing the trees, the road. The beams of his headlights reflected off the white air like he was driving through a tunnel. Maybe you should pull over, the man said. Can't, Thomas muttered, pulse hammering. No shoulder here. The man smiled faintly, as though he'd expected that answer. Then keep driving. Thomas's chest felt tight. He forced himself to glance at the passenger seat and froze. It was empty. Thomas's foot slammed the brake. The tires screamed against the wet pavement and the steering wheel jerked in his hands. The car fishtailed once, twice, and then straightened. Barely. His chest heaved, heart hammering loud enough to drown out the engine. The passenger seat was still empty. Where did you go? He whispered, as if expecting an answer. The mist was everywhere now, choking the road, turning the world into a white tunnel. Thomas leaned forward over the wheel, squinting into the glow of his headlights. His knuckles were bone white. Then he saw it. Two pale beams in the distance, another set of headlights, coming toward him fast. Too fast. Thomas swore, yanked the wheel right. There was no shoulder, only wet grass and the dark drop beyond. The car bounced, tires losing traction, the world spinning into a blur of white and black. And then, silence. For a moment he thought he'd stopped, that somehow he'd made it. But the headlights were still coming, and the steering wheel wasn't in his hands anymore. Thomas blinked and saw himself, in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, mouth open in a scream. The image lasted a second before the car slid sideways, hit the guardrail, and went through. The scream turned into a metallic shriek as the world tipped, rolled, and exploded in glass and twisted steel. Then everything went black. Morning came gray and wet. Deputy Carson was first on scene. The car lay nose first against a tree 30 feet down the embankment. Roof caved. windshield gone. Inside, Thomas sat slumped against the deployed airbag, his face bloodless, eyes half open, seatbelt still buckled. Single fatality, Carson muttered into his radio. Driver only, no passengers. Sheriff Hayes arrived half an hour later. He stood on the roadside, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, staring down at a wreck. Another one, he said quietly. Carson nodded. Same as the others. No skid marks this time, just left the road. Hayes grunted. Get the wrecker. Close the report. But before he turned away, Hayes noticed something strange. The passenger door was open, not wrenched or bent from the crash, simply ajar, like someone had stepped out carefully before the car left the road. He frowned, staring at the opening, the wet grass beyond it. There were no footprints. Hayes pulled his coat tighter. Seal it up, he said, climbing back to the road. By the time the tow truck arrived, the mist had returned, rising from the trees like smoke. And at the far curve of Black Hollow Road, a lone figure stood by the shoulder, watching. When the truck's headlights swept over him, he raised one hand, a small, polite gesture, and waited for the next car to stop. If this story unsettled you, leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.